This is going to be my last video discussing Sean McDowell and Scott Ray's recent video, How Much Can Christians Compromise on Sexuality? I do have a lot more I would like to say about this video, but I'd rather spend that time finishing the book I'm writing on how to be evangelical and gay affirming. This last installment, I want to focus on the topic of bigotry. So I'm going to play a clip from Scott Ray where he's talking about how Christians who are affirming and non-affirming are both making judgments of one another. And he kind of concludes by saying, therefore, it's wrong for an affirming Christian to view a non-affirming Christian as a bigot. And then McDowell's going to make a comment at the end about, yeah, I've been called a bigot, I've been called a homophobe, even to my face, he says, and then he's going to make a comment about judgment, and I'm going to pause it there because then I want to offer some reflections as to how they have framed this issue and ask that question, are they in fact bigots? So let's start off by hearing from Scott Ray.
I would say a moral assessment might be a more accurate term for what we're doing. It's a judgment that has sort of that judgmental baggage
Has to
attached
do
to
with
it.
attitude rather than content.
Right. But I think, the chapter admits that spirited debate about affirming, non-affirming.
Uh, Pause. So Scott Ray here is saying he doesn't want to say he's making a judgment that your gay marriage is immoral. He's making a moral assessment that it's immoral. Okay.
Positions is okay. I would suggest it's also okay to try and persuade someone to adopt a different position. It's also okay to conclude that they are wrong in their view. Now, I'm not making an assessment of the validity of their faith. That's up to God.
Sure.
But I think I can make an assessment of their faithfulness to Scripture. And I would expect them to do the same thing for me if I've got areas of my life that are out of bounds. And so I think the judgment goes somewhat goes both ways on that. And so it's not just the traditional folks who hold to a non-affirming position that are the ones who are being judgmental. Because I don't know how many times you and I have both been called bigots.
Yeah,
For
sure.
our view on same-sex marriage
I
and other matters of sexuality.
been called it to my face and homophobic, which is fine. But in Matthew chapter 7 in the Sermon on the Mount, do not judge lest you be judged.
Okay, keep in mind I'm pausing McDowell mid-speech here, so if you want to hear the rest of what he has to say, you can go to 50 minutes, 35 seconds in of the video itself. But, and let me say positively something I do agree with here that Scott Ray says. First of all, I appreciate that he doesn't come out and say that Christians who are affirming go to hell, because there are many people who say that. He says he's not going to make a judgment about the spiritual destiny of anybody, but he will make judgments about the accuracy of their moral views according to his understanding of Scripture. And he points out that they likewise are making judgments of him. And I agree with all of that. And I appreciate that he's not judging the eternal destiny of people, that he's not going to say because you're affirming you're going to hell. So I want to appreciate that and state, yeah, I agree with you there. And I appreciate the tone in which you've communicated here. But then he adds this thing, I've been called a bigot. And he's expressing dissatisfaction at that. He's saying because we're both making moral judgments or moral assessments, as he prefers that term, we're both making moral assessments of one another, that it would be wrong for you to make the assessment that I'm a bigot because we're both making assessments of one another. And it's at that point that I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to express disagreement. While it is true that we both make moral assessments, the affirming Christian and the non-affirming Christian are making moral assessments of the other, and each is saying, relative to their understanding of Scripture and theology, the other is incorrect. There is also an important disanalogy here. So this brings me to Richard and Mildred Loving, the couple depicted in this picture. In the late 1950s, Richard and Mildred wanted to get married, but they could not get married in the state of Virginia where they were from because of something called the Racial Integrity Act, which prevented or prohibited interracial marriage within the state. So they went to Washington, D.C., and were married there. Close to a decade later, in 1967, they brought their complaint to the Supreme Court in a case that became known as Virginia v. Loving. And in a unanimous decision, the Supreme Court of the United States overturned the Racial Integrity Act, said it was unconstitutional, and said that people of different races had the right to be married to one another. And I think that that's a good thing. So, what does it mean to be a bigot? Here's definition from Oxford dictionaries. A bigot is a person who is obstinately or unreasonably attached to a belief, opinion, or faction, especially one that is prejudiced against or antagonistic toward a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular group. In the 1950s, in the 1960s, large tracts of fundamentalist and evangelical Protestant Christianity were deeply segregationist and opposed to interracial marriage. They would have been enthusiastic supporters of the Racial Integrity Act. And they would have viewed this Supreme Court decision in 1967 as a travesty. So, those people, we would look back today and say that those segregationists, yes, they had a different moral assessment than uh, Richard and Mildred Loving and others who wanted the right for marriage to be extended to interracial couples. They both had different moral assessments, but only one group was a bigot, ultimately. It was the group that was seeking to deprive the right to marry to that other group. And we've made that decision because ultimately we think that there is no legitimate principled basis to oppose the rights of interracial couples to marry. So there's not just there's two different moral assessments here. We ultimately think one of those assessments was correct, and the other assessment is unique and asymmetrical here in that it was the one that was seeking to deprive a right to the other group. And that's what makes it bigoted. It's unreasonable and it's seeking to deprive the right to the other group. In other words, the right to marry. So it's prejudiced, antagonistic. So all those Christians in the 1950s and 60s who were opposing giving marriages as a right to interracial couples, they're bigots. Well, this brings us to the topic of marriage, same-sex marriage. In 2007, Mildred Loving was interviewed on, I guess, the 40th anniversary of the decision. And this is what she said. She said, I am proud that Richards and my name is on a court case that can help reinforce the love, the commitment, the fairness, and the family that so many people, black or white, young or old, gay or straight, seek in life. I support the freedom to marry for all. That's what loving and loving, in other words, loving Supreme Court case and loving lowercase l, are all about. So for Mildred Loving, if you oppose the right of interracial couples to marry, you're a bigot. And if you oppose the right of gay couples to marry, you're a bigot. So ultimately, are Sean McDowell and Scott Ray bigots? Well, I guess it depends on your assessment. But let's first note, again, that's simply saying, well, they just have a different moral assessment from affirming Christians. Uh, that in and of itself suggests a symmetry, but the symmetry breaks down when we consider that only one of these two sides, only the non-affirming side, is seeking to deprive a right that would be possessed by certain members of the population. They're seeking to prevent the oppose in gay couples from marrying, and in that sense, they're expressing what could be a prejudice or antagonistic view toward that other group. So then ultimately everything is to depend on this. What are the arguments that they provide for their opinion that you should not have the right to marry. And it used to be that Christians would invoke all sorts of arguments that were philosophical, legal, scientific in terms of the disorderedness of homosexuality as a diagnosis in the DSM up until 1974, at least, and about the instability of gay marriages and infidelity among gay people, and that it's unstable in society and that it'll lead to a slippery slope. And honestly, these are all terrible arguments. What it comes down to for these conservative Christians is that their interpretation of the Bible is that the Bible does not allow it. And if you conclude that that is no more a compelling argument than a Mormon telling you the Book of Mormon does not allow X, the Book of Mormon does not allow uh, Black people to become ordained in the Mormon Church. If you think that that is not an excuse, not a good reason to exclude Black people from an office of ministry in the Mormon Church, and that ultimately that's just bigotry, well, then you'll say that that Mormon who does not allow Black people to become ordained in the church, which I understand was the position of the Mormon Church up until 1978, then that's bigotry. And if you're a Christian who says, because my Bible says you can't marry, you shouldn't be able to marry, then yes, you're a bigot. We both have different moral assessments. That is true. There is symmetry there, but there's an asymmetry in that you have unreasonable grounds to deny the rights to a certain segment of the population, and that is prejudiced and that is antagonistic, and you are a bigot. And yes, someone even could call you that to your face.